Hello, my dear student friends. Now we are at session 27. Post independence Indian English poetry, major poets and representative poems. So, these are the objectives of today's session. First of all, to read and understand the poetry of the representative period, that is, post independence period. Second is to appreciate Kamala Das's poem, My Grandmother's House. The third objective is to understand how the post independence poetry is different from their predecessors. Lastly, to be able to critically appreciate and evaluate poetry of these poets. So, these are the session outcomes, and by the end of this session, you should be able to understand and correlate the differences between pre and post independence poetry. You should be able to understand and appreciate Kamala Das's My Grandmother's House. So, let's begin with the poem, that is My Grandmother's House by Kamala Das. So, before we begin the actual poem, let's have a quick understanding of the biography of Kamala Das, in a very brief way. So, Kamala Das was born in 1934. She was educated mainly in Kerala. She was born in Malabar and, as she herself said, speaks 3 languages, writes in 2, dreams in 1. So, speaks 3 languages, that means Malayalam, English, and Bengali. Writes in 2, that means English and Malayalam. She prefers to write prose in Malayalam and poetry in English. And she dreams in 1, and that must be her mother tongue, that is Malayalam. So, she is a bilingual writer. She prefers to write poetry in English and fiction in Malayalam. The literary awards she has won include the Asian Poetry Award in 1963 and the Sahitya Academy Award in 1984. So here is the poem for you, My Grandmother's House. Before I explain this poem to you, I would like to read the entire poem for you once. Please focus on the intonation, please focus on the tone with which I read this poem, because in my tone you will understand some of the important aspects of this poem. So here I begin to read this poem. Pay attention, listen carefully. My Grandmother's House by Kamala Das. There is a house now far away where once I received love. That woman died. The house withdrew into silence. Snakes moved among books. I was then too young to read, and my blood turned cold like the moon. How often I think of going there to peer through blind eyes of windows, or just listen to the frozen air, or in wild despair pick an armful of darkness to bring it here to lie behind my bedroom door like a brooding dog. You cannot believe, darling, can you, that I lived in such a house and was proud and loved? I who have lost my way and beg now at strangers' doors to receive love, at least in small change. So, this is a poem. As you know, Kamala Das is very famous for her confessional approach to her writing, especially the poems. So, this poem is very clearly an autobiographical one. So, her own experiences, she has captured in this poem. So, she feels uprooted as she writes this poem, because she is, it is a basic need. It is not just food, shelter, and clothing that a human being needs. More importantly, human being needs love. Now, she feels that she is not loved anymore, and she feels that she is uprooted. She feels that she doesn't belong anywhere. So, when she is in such kind of despair, when she is in such kind of mood, okay, she remembers the good old days where she received a lot of love from her grandmother, and she remembers that, and she brings it out in a simple but very forceful language. The kind of images that she uses in this poem are really wonderful, and they touch the heart of the reader. So here we go with the details about this poem. Okay, this poem first appeared in Kamala Das's first anthology of verses titled "Summertime in Calcutta" in 1965, published in 1965. It is also an autobiographical poem in which the poet's longing for her parental house in Malabar is movingly described. So her longing for her grandmother's house, that is parental house, it is very touchingly, described, movingly described. The poem shows Kamala Das's intense love and attachment to that house. She suffers from an acute sense of alienation after having left this place after her marriage. So now, as she writes this poem, she is married, and her married life is not safe. She is not feeling secured in that. She feels that she is deprived. She feels that she is not at all loved. So at that juncture, what makes us remember is the days where she received abundance of love and a sense of security from her grandmother. But now her grandmother is dead, and that house where she lived is abundant. Even these insects and snakes have made their homes out of that home. So this is a very pathetic situation. A note of pessimism runs throughout the action of the poem. See, the poem is very pessimistic. Hopelessness is there in every line in this poem. The intensity of her grief is suggestively conveyed by the ellipses in the form of a few dots in the section of the poem. So you can see some 3 dots in different sections of the poem. So those ellipses, what she cannot put them in her agony, her grief, that she cannot put them in words, what she has done is she has just put them in the form of ellipses. The poet now lives in a big city after her marriage, a remote place from her grandmother's house. She is reminded of her grandmother's house where she spent her memorable childhood. So, sense of alienation. She is now in a big city. She was very comfortable, safe, secured, loved, proud in her grandmother's house. Now she is no more there. The sense of alienation is troubling Kamala Das here. The very opening lines of the poem capture alive the poet's mood of nostalgia. She is remembered of the happiest days of her childhood, which she spent in the company of her grandmother. So, in the very first 2 lines, you can notice, that nostalgic ambience that the author creates. The poet often longs to visit her grandmother's house, to which she was emotionally attached since her childhood. She feels like visiting that place, but it is too far. It has been a place of security and protection, which is sadly missing in her new house in the city. So, she feels insecure. She feels, she never feels any love in the new place. So, she is alienated. Okay. Kamala Das exposes the futility of loveless and hopeless marital relationships in these 5 concluding lines of the poem. The 5 concluding lines are very strong in the use of images. In these 5 lines, you can notice, she feels like visiting her grandmother's place, and in that darkness, she feels like getting an armful of darkness to her home in Calcutta. she feels like keeping that darkness near the bedroom doors so that darkness protects her insecure life. That kind of strong, sharp images are present in the poem. The poet is reminded of her grandmother's house where she received love and safety in her childhood. She has lost all her identity and freedom in her loveless relationship. My grandmother's house is a constituent poem of Kamala Das's maiden publication, Summer in Calcutta. Though short, the poem wraps within itself an intriguing sense of nostalgia and uprootedness. In her eternal quest for love in such a loveless world, the poet remembers her grandmother, which surfaces some emotional long forgotten and buried within her, an ironical expression of her past, which is a tragic contrast to her present situation. So there is a contrast between her past and her present here. It is a forcefully moving poem fraught with nostalgia and anguish. So this is the poem for you. Okay, I would suggest that you read this poem again and again and try to understand the poem in a better light. Remember, it's a great poem, and great poems or great literature is always or most usually autobiographical in nature. This poem is also autobiographical. It conveys her own personal condition in this poem, her helplessness. Okay, this poem is very important because this poem is written when she was quite young, and this poem appeared in Summer in Calcutta. Okay, so before we go to the quiz, I would like to just focus on few important images in this poem. Okay, she wants to go to her just to listen. The author wants to go to her grandmother's house just to listen to the frozen air. See, frozen air image. Or in wild despair, pick an armful of darkness to bring it here to lie behind my bedroom door like a brooding dog. So she wants to visit her grandmother's place, out of despair. She wants to pick an armful of darkness and bring it back to her new home in Calcutta and keep it behind bedroom door like a brooding dog. So this darkness from her grandmother's house, she wants to keep, she wants that darkness to protect her here. And there is a rhetoric element here. She communicates to her husband and she tells him, "You cannot believe, darling, can you, that I lived in such a house and was proud and loved?" So she tells to the person with whom she has no expectations, or the person who never loves her, she tells him, "Can you believe that I lived in such a house and received so much of love and I was so proud? You cannot believe it." So she tries to tell her background. She wants to convey that she comes from a place where she received a lot of love, affection, care, security. Okay, received all this, but now all this is missing in your hands. I who have lost my way and beg now at strangers' doors to receive love. So she confesses that she has lost her way, and now as she is in need of love, she has to go and beg it at strangers' doors. So please read this poem at least 3-4 times. I'm sure you will get an idea of what my grandmother's house is to Kamala Das. So before we wind up this session, I would like to take you through a quiz. Okay, here comes the first question. My grandmother's house first appeared in the anthology of Kamala Das by name. My story is Summer in Calcutta, A Hot Noon in Malabar, The Descendants. The right answer is A, my story. The right answer is Summer in Calcutta. Okay. The intensity of Kamala Das's grief is suggestively conveyed in the poem by the question marks, ellipses, commas, exclamatory marks. Right answer is ellipses, those few dots. The darkness in her grandmother's house now to Kamala Das is horrifying, comforting, making no difference to her, saddening. So the darkness is comforting. The poet in the poem shows the ironical contrast between her past and present. Past and present, childhood and married life, innocence and experience, past and future, childhood and married life. So all these answers are B. Okay, I'm sure you will go through this poem again, and for your reference, I have some more books. You can refer them also. Okay, but before I end up this session, I would like to stress the fact that you should be able to read this original poem at least 3-4 times. Only then you will get the meanings. Okay, so with this we shall stop, and in the next session we shall study another poem. Thank you very much.